In the field of psychology, Machiavellianism is a personality trait centered on manipulativeness, callousness, and indifference to morality, with high levels of self-interest. The term is derived from a 16th century Italian philosopher named Niccolò di Bernardo Machiavelli and his most famous work, The Prince. In the underworld of the American Mafia, there have been some mafiosos who embody this personality trait. To them, the ends always justify the means. They are Machiavellian Mobsters, and these are their stories. Number 25. Anthony Tony Bender Strollo. Anthony Tony Bender Strollo was born on June 18, 1899 in the New York City borough of Manhattan. His parents, Leon Strollo and Giovannini Nigro Strollo, immigrated from the Italian province of Calabria in the late 1890s and made a home on the outskirts of Little Italy in Manhattan, where young Anthony Strollo, along with his two brothers, Emilio and Dominic, were born and raised. In the early 1900s, Leon Strollo was a laborer, and the family lived at 181 Thompson Street in Manhattan's Greenwich Village. The family address changed only slightly to 177 Thompson Street by 1920. At that time, Leon Strollo ran his own candy store, and his sons Anthony and Dominic worked as teamsters and truck drivers. Anthony Strollo appears to have been married just after 1920. He and a wife named Rose can be found in the 1930 U.S. Census in a Thompson Street apartment. Strollo still claimed to be working as a truck driver at that time, but he was already engaged in racketeering, likely as a part of Giuseppe Massaria's mafia organization. Massaria was on his way to becoming the most powerful boss, not only in New York City, but also the entire country. However, Massaria would soon be challenged for dominance in the New York City underworld by an upstart from Castellammare del Golfo named Salvatore Maranzano. The Calamari War would break out around 1930 between Joe the Boss Massaria and his rival Maranzano. During the Calamari War, there were many mobsters switching sides. Strollo sided with the Massaria faction in the conflict, answering to Charlie Luciano and Vito Genovese directly. Luciano would then order the murder of his boss, Joe Massaria, while making a deal with Maranzano to end the conflict. However, Maranzano would call a meeting in Wappinger Falls, New York, of all the crime bosses in the country and declare himself capo de tutti capi, or boss of all bosses. Maranzano also whittled down the rival family's rackets in favor of his own. Luciano appeared to accept these changes but was merely biding his time before removing Maranzano. Although Maranzano was slightly more forward-thinking than Massaria, Luciano had come to believe that Maranzano was even more greedy and hidebound than Massaria had been. Luciano would have Maranzano killed as well, giving birth to the modern-day mafia as we know it. Following the brief reign of Salvatore Maranzano, Strollo became a lieutenant in the Luciano organization and a key ally of Genovese. Strollo's business interests at the time included numerous nightclubs and restaurants. He also oversaw rackets at Manhattan's West Side docks. Anthony Strollo would see a number of changes in both his personal as well as his criminal life. He would divorce his first wife, and at the end of March 1932, Strollo would marry again. This time, his bride was Edna Goldberg, a New York native. The couple traveled to Bermuda in the spring for a honeymoon, returning to New York on May 25th that same year. Their home for a time was 45 Christopher Street in Greenwich Village, where the couple would have 2 children together. Strollo also became a capo for Luciano and underboss Vito Genovese. Strollo assumed control of the Greenwich Village crew, operating illegal gambling in New York's Greenwich Village and Lower Manhattan districts. On June 18, 1936, boss Lucky Luciano was sentenced from 30 to 50 years in prison on a pandering charge, making underboss Vito Genovese the acting boss. Genovese designated Strollo as his underboss. In 1937, facing a probable murder indictment, Genovese fled to Italy. Genovese wanted Strollo to keep control of the family for him, but Genovese's rival Frank Costello took over as acting boss and designated Willie Moretti as his underboss. Strollo, sensing the conflict between Costello and Genovese, began playing both sides. In 1946, after being extradited from Italy to the United States and then escaping indictment, Genovese returned to the family as a capo, with Strollo as his right hand. Strollo supervised Genovese's rackets in Greenwich Village and the New Jersey waterfront for the next 10 years. Strollo successfully operated a string of Greenwich Village nightclubs, including the popular Black Cat, the Hollywood, and the Village Inn. During this time, the Strollos relocated across the Hudson River in the area of Fort Lee, New Jersey. Strollo's racket territory increased, and he became a power on the Jersey City docks by the early 1950s. A political scandal was triggered when news came out about a March 14, 1952 meeting between Strollo and Jersey City Mayor John V. Kenney. Kenney tried for a time to deny the meeting, which had been arranged by actor Phil Regan and held in Regan's suite at the Manhattan Warwick Hotel, but was eventually forced to acknowledge the meeting took place. Kenney said he met with Strollo in order to resolve some conflicts with labor along the docks. On December 17, 1952, Strollo was summoned to testify at the New York State Crime Commission. He was an uncooperative witness, claiming either a bad memory or refusing to testify based on his Fifth Amendment right under the Constitution against self-incrimination. Strollo often flexed his underworld muscle in other ways. It is alleged that Strollo pushed Anthony Provenzano into leadership positions at the Local 560 of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Provenzano started his career in organized labor, as well as in labor racketeering as the Local 560 shop steward for the H.P. Welsh Company. He eventually won election to the local presidency. Provenzano would become a strong ally and later a determined enemy of Teamster President James R. Hoffa. In 1957, Strollo assisted Genovese in planning an assassination attempt on Frank Costello. On the day of the murder attempt, Strollo met with Costello in the late afternoon and learned his itinerary for the evening. Strollo then passed that information on to the Genovese hitmen. It is alleged that Vito Genovese tapped 3 Greenwich Village-based soldiers from Tony Bender's crew to do his bidding. An up-and-coming young hoodlum named Vincent the Chin Gigante was chosen to be the actual shooter, with Thomas Tommy Ryan Eboli and Dominic Koki Dom Alongi acting as the getaway driver and lookout respectively. Several other soldiers were assigned to man a second crash car to protect the hit team from any interference from police. As luck would have it, Gigante only grazed Costello's head that fateful evening in 1957, allowing Frank Costello to walk away with only minor injuries. But it did convince Costello to immediately relinquish the top spot in favor of his adversary, lest he risk an all-out bloody gang war. After Vito Genovese consolidated his underworld power as the new boss, and now ran what is today known as the Genovese crime family, Strollo's power and influence also increased. Strollo was now one of the most powerful gangsters in New York City, but for Tony Bender, that wasn't enough. It is alleged that in 1959, Strollo changed loyalties again and joined in a conspiracy against Genovese. After a secret meeting with Gambino crime family boss Carlo Gambino, Strollo allegedly participated in a plot to set up Genovese on a drug trafficking conviction. Federal narcotics charges resulted in hefty prison sentences for Vito Genovese, Joe Valachi, and others. After his mentor and benefactor was convicted just a few years later in 1959 and jailed for 15 years for narcotics conspiracy, Tony Bender Strollo's power increased exponentially. For all intents and purposes, Strollo was now more than ever before the top figure in the entire Genovese family and Vito's eyes and ears over the membership. Fate would intervene for Anthony Tony Bender Strollo when at one point Genovese and Costello ended up incarcerated at the same Atlanta penitentiary. After Costello turned himself in for tax evasion, he was sent to the same prison that Genovese would end up at after his narcotics conviction. Costello had a lot of friends in prison, and many, including the warden, thought there may be a war brewing. Costello chose the diplomatic approach and met with Genovese, calming the tensions. Costello was put back in good graces in the Brigade, and all was well. However, a side effect of their meeting was a series of discussions about Capo Tony Bender Strollo. After these many discussions, Costello and Genovese realized that Strollo had been engineering the friction between the two mobsters dating all the way back to 1946 when Genovese returned from Italy. Backing up this claim, an FBI informant stated, "Following Genovese's return to the United States, friction developed between Costello and Genovese and was furthered by the machinations of Anthony Tony Bender Strollo. Strollo was an ambitious capo regime in Genovese's brigade, and on every occasion attempted to develop discord and distrust between Costello and Genovese, hoping to pit the two against each other and in the ensuing struggle emerge himself as boss." Sources advise that Costello subsequently was assigned to the Atlanta Penitentiary on an income tax conviction, and in 1960 Genovese arrived in the same prison following a narcotics conviction. It is reported to the source that these two individuals compared notes and discovered that they had been used by Strollo the whole time. Costello was reinstated into the brigade by Genovese, and Genovese ordered a hit on Tony Bender Strollo. At about 10 p.m. on April 8, 1962, Strollo told his wife he needed to go out. She later reported to police that he drove off with an unknown associate in a 1961 Cadillac. Strollo was never seen or heard from again. A year after Strollo went missing, the FBI was secretly listening in on a conversation between two mobsters when the subject of Strollo came up. Anthony Little Pussy Russo told Genovese mafioso Angelo Gyp DiCarlo that Richie the Boot Boyardo of New Jersey had boasted that he had killed Strollo. Conflicting information was provided to the FBI in the summer of 1965. At that time, New Jersey racketeer Harold K.O. Konigsberg revealed that Tommy Ryan Eboli and Gerardo Catina ordered Strollo's murder after obtaining approval from the imprisoned Genovese. According to Konigsberg, Eboli had been trying for years to eliminate Strollo. On the night of April 8th, Konigsberg stated that Pepe Sabato called Tony Bender and drove him to the parking lot of the Milestone restaurant in Fort Lee, New Jersey, where Tommy Ryan Eboli and Dom the Sailor de Cuarto were waiting in a panel truck. Konigsberg then stated that Tommy and Dom killed Tony Bender in the parking lot. Regardless of who pulled the trigger, the order was without a doubt handed down by Genovese. Following his death, Strollo's rackets in the Genovese crime family were handed over to Pasquale Patsy Ryan Eboli, the brother of Thomas Tommy Ryan Eboli. Anthony Tony Bender Strollo was one of La Cosa Nostra's craftiest and cleverest mobsters. To play two of the most powerful mobsters in history against each other takes guile, intelligence, and a huge amount of intestinal fortitude. Tony Bender was truly a Machiavellian mobster.